The pulse pistol was a cold, unyielding weight pressed directly over Kaelen's heart. He didn't blink. He couldn't afford to, not when the Xylari pilot's eyes were wide and fracturing with the jagged light of neural feedback. Nixara was a mess of broken armor and trembling limbs, her breath coming in sharp, wet hitches that rattled against the bunker's sterile air. Kaelen's fingers were slick with the blue-tinged biogel, a forbidden substance he was currently rubbing into the raw, glowing burns on her neck. One wrong move and the charge in that weapon would liquefy his chest. But the choice between a safe cage and a dangerous shared sky had already been made the moment he opened the airlock. Aegis IV was never meant to be a place for the living. It was a graveyard of ice and titanium. Kaelen had spent 6 months watching the atmospheric monitors. His only company, the rustle of paper from the physical archives he'd smuggled along. Humans liked to think they could conquer anything with enough data, but the sky didn't just rain. It screamed in violet discharge. When the ionic blizzard rolled over the crystalline peaks, it wasn't just weather. It was an assault. He had been prepared for the isolation. Truth is, he'd lived it his whole life. He had his books and his heaters and the steady hum of the bunker's life support. Then came the sound. It wasn't the wind. It was a rhythmic, desperate thudding against the outer hull. It was a debt written in biogel and paid in forbidden stars, though he didn't know it yet. Kaelen had overridden the safety protocols, a move that would have seen him court-martialed back on Earth. He dragged the armored figure through the decontamination spray, the steam rising as the sub-zero plates met the warm interior air. When he finally wrenched the damaged flight helmet free, he didn't see a monster. He saw a woman with skin like polished obsidian and eyes that held the terrifying clarity of a supernova. Now in the dim emergency lighting, the space between them was thick enough to choke on. Nixara's hand shook, the weapon wavering just a fraction of an inch. "You are human," she spat. The word sounded like a curse, or perhaps a question she didn't want the answer to. "And you're dying," Kaelen replied softly. He didn't pull away from the weapon. Instead, he reached out and gently closed his hand over hers, guiding the barrel down. Her skin was scorching. No a fever born of Xylari biology failing under the strain of the crash. "Let me help, or shoot, but choose quickly." Her gaze searched his. There was no logic in what he was doing. The Xylari were isolationists who viewed humanity as a plague of curiosity. Yet here he was, wasting restricted medical supplies on an enemy who would likely kill him the moment she could stand. It was a paradox of empathy, a radical kind of kindness that felt more like a weapon than her pulse pistol ever could. The storm outside roared, shaking the very foundations of the bunker. But inside, the world had shrunk to the heat of their skin and the smell of cooling metal. Nixara let the weapon drop to the floor. The clatter was the loudest thing he'd ever heard. The silence that followed the drop of the weapon was worse than the storm. For 3 days, when the bunker became a world of two people who were never meant to exist in the same breath. Kaelen shared his archives, the physical weight of ink and paper. He read to her from the ancient texts, stories of humans who sought the horizon simply because it was there. Nixara watched him with a stillness that was predatory at first, then something else. She spoke of the Xylari spires, of the cold perfection of their hegemony, and the way her people viewed the stars not as a playground, but as a territory to be guarded. Truth is, they were both hiding from the same thing. Isolation wasn't just a mission parameter for Kaelen, it was a shield. But as the biogel healed her skin, the distance between them began to fail. He taught her how to drink coffee that tasted like burnt earth. And she showed him the bioluminescent patterns in her blood that reacted to the bunker's low-frequency hum. It turned out that beneath the violent reputation of her species was a culture that simply forgot how to trust. When the violet discharge finally faded from the sky and the crystal peaks grew still, Nyxara stood by the airlock. Her armor was patched with scavenged metal and Kaelen's ingenuity. She didn't say thank you. Xylari didn't have a word for it. She simply looked at him, her eyes tracing the lines of his face as if memorizing a map of a forbidden country. Then she stepped out into the blinding white of Aegis 4. Kaelen sat in the silence for exactly 12 minutes. The bunker felt like a coffin. He lived his life by the book, a quiet observer of a universe that didn't care if he stayed or went. He waited for the relief of being alone again, but it never came. Instead, the airlock cycled. Nyxara stood there, her breath huffing in the freezing air. Behind her, a bioorganic vessel, sleek, dark, and pulsing with a soft internal light, hovered above the snow. She didn't use words this time. She held out a hand, the palm scarred from the neural feedback. It was the same choice he'd made during the storm, only this time the sky was wide and terrifyingly open. He didn't hesitate. Kaelen went to his console and initiated a ghost loop. To anyone back on Earth, the bunker would look operational, a steady stream of fake data masking a vacant room. He left the books behind, save for one tucked into his flight jacket. The years that followed were a blur of sharp edges and lethal social rituals. Under Nyxara's life bond protection, Kaelen became a ghost in the Xylari Spire cities, a human anomaly in a world of silver and silence. He learned the weight of their traditions and the cost of their peace, and he learned that radical empathy wasn't just a human quirk, it was a survival trait that could bridge the impossible. Now standing on the transparent curve of a star bridge, Kaelen felt her shoulder brush against his. Below them, a sun was rising over a world neither of them had been born to. The light caught the blue tint of her skin and the gray in his hair. They were the first bridge, a debt paid in forbidden stars. Kaelen looked at the woman who had once pointed a gun at his heart and realized that the cage was finally gone. They weren't just the survivors of a storm anymore. They were the architects of a new shared sky.